Okay, I'm going to start just so we have plenty of time to hear from our artists. Hello, my name is Keisha Williams. I'm the director and curator of galleries and exhibitions at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I'm also the program director of the McKnight Visual Artist Fellowships. I want to thank you all for being here tonight for this discussion. Since 1982, the McKnight Fellowships for Visual Artists has rewarded talented Minnesota visual artists whose work is of exceptional artistic merit and who are at a career stage beyond emerging. Founded on the belief that Minnesota thrives when its artists thrive, the McKnight Foundation's artist program is one of the oldest and largest of its kind in the country. Each year, 6 $25,000 fellowships in the visual arts category are awarded. The focus of the fellowship program is to connect fellows with national visiting critics, participate in the McKnight Discussion Series, and for each fellow to pursue additional professional development opportunities over 2 years. I want to thank the McKnight Foundation for their continued support, and I'd also like to thank the Minneapolis Institute of Art for their continued support of this discussion series. Over many years, we've seen some of Minnesota's most significant artists grace this stage, and it's an honor to continue that tradition with this discussion series. I'd personally like to thank Casey Riley, Chair of Global Contemporary Art and Curator of Photography and New Media, for her continued partnership in uplifting Minnesota voices. And I'd also like to thank our dedicated partner, Anna Dillard. I don't think she's here today, but who helps organize these events on MIA's events team. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Leslie Ureña. Leslie is Associate Curator of Global Contemporary Art here at MIA. She joined in 2023. Her research and curatorial work specializes in the history of photography, migration, and transnational artist practices. Since her arrival, she's curated and co-curated several exhibitions, including Another Look, Networks of Care, and the upcoming show Remnants, which opens on April 24th. She was also the venue curator of last year's The Shape of Time Korean Art After 1989, organized by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Prior to MIA, Leslie was curator of photographs at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, where she organized numerous exhibitions of photography and contemporary art. She's also worked in curatorial departments at the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and the Dallas Museum of Art, among others. Ureña holds a BA in History of Art from Yale University and an MA and PhD in Art History from Northwestern University. So I'd like to welcome Leslie to the stage.
Thank you, Keisha, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. As was noted, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design is pleased to present the McKnight Discussion Series featuring Katie Pfohl, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Detroit Art Institute, or Institute of Art, actually. Yeah, right. Okay. In conversation with the 2023 McKnight Fellows Tia-Simone Gardner, Sieng Lee, and Lindsay Rhyner. This program pairs a visiting critic with the 3 McKnight Visual Artist Fellows and offers attendees an opportunity to learn more about the fellowship recipients as well as how their work intersects with broader contemporary art ideas and concerns. And as we've heard, it's generously supported by the McKnight Foundation, and it's co-presented with the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And the fellowships are funded by the McKnight Foundation and administered by MCAD. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the discussion, and if you have a question, please raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you. After the talk, please make your way into the atrium where you will have an opportunity to meet the artists. So now more about the speakers. Katie Pfohl is Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Detroit Institute of Arts. At DIA, she is working on a reinstallation of the museum's contemporary galleries, collaborating with curatorial colleagues as well as local and national advisors to reimagine the space and the collection. From 2015 to 2022, she was the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the New Orleans Museum of Art. At NOMA, she curated almost 30 exhibitions, acquired or commissioned over 100 works of art by local, national, and international artists, and worked collaboratively on innovative educational programming and community engagement, and reinstalled the museum's 20th century and contemporary galleries. Pfohl's projects have received funding and awards from the Warhol Foundation, the National Endowment of the Humanities, the Terra Foundation, the Louisiana Endowment of the Humanities, and the Elizabeth Firestone Graham Foundation, among others. Her exhibitions have been recognized by many publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Art in America, Art Forum, Hyperallergic, and Burnaway. In 2014, Pfohl completed her PhD in art history at Harvard University, and in 2006, she participated in the Whitney Independent Study Program in New York. Pfohl has held positions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and the LSU Museum of Art. Now to the artists. Tia-Simone Gardner is an interdisciplinary artist, educator, and undisciplined Black feminist geographer, committed to understanding relationships between Blackness and landscape. Gardner grew up in Fairfield, Alabama, across the street from Birmingham, and learned to see landscape, capitalist extraction, and containment through this place. She received her MFA in interdisciplinary practices and time-based media from the University of Pennsylvania, followed by her participation as a studio fellow at the Whitney Independent Study Program. I guess you didn't overlap, maybe you did, I don't know. And her doctorate in feminist studies from the University of Minnesota. Her work has been shown both nationally and internationally, and her writing has appeared in Georgia, an independently published arts writing journal, and New Sons, a journal published by USA Artists, and she lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. Sieng Lee is a visual artist who exists in between being Hmong and American. He seeks to expand beyond the traditions of his community and find a place in contemporary art. Lee believes that the artist can do and be more than a maker of objects and artifacts. The role of the artist is more than just to create, but to disrupt. His work has been supported by the Jerome Foundation and the Minnesota State Arts Board. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Graphic Design and a Master's of Fine Arts from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Currently, he works as an artist in residence at White Bear Center for the Arts, where he mentors, teaches, and supports other artists. And finally, Lindsay Rhyner is a textile and mixed media artist living and working in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Through experimentation and exploring different mediums, Rhyner discovered an interest in manipulating and collaging textiles, combining skills such as sewing, beading, collage, and painting. Rhyner is self-taught in the textile arts and has been working in fiber for most of her career. She creates large-scale wall hangings from a variety of materials, mostly second-hand or recycled goods. She is inspired by the world and materials around her. Rhyner has attended residencies in Daegu, South Korea, and Clichy, France, and in 2016 she received an MCAD Jerome Fellowship for Emerging Artists and had a solo show at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. More recently, she has participated in exhibitions at the University of Minnesota and Parlor and Ramp Gallery in Chicago. So thank you to all of you for being here this evening, and please, the speakers, join us on stage. Thank you.
Well, firstly, a huge thank you to Leslie for that very generous introduction, and also a huge thank you to Mia for hosting us, and to the McKnight Foundation for supporting these great artist residencies, as well as for all of the incredible work that you're doing. And I want to give a special shout out to the inimitable Melanie and Keisha for all of your amazing work to organize this event, as well as the fellowships over the course of the last couple of years. So I've had the great pleasure of coming to Minneapolis over the course of the last couple of years, meeting with artists and getting to know the practice of the three amazing artists that are on the stage with us right now. So I feel so honored to be here tonight and to be in dialogue with the three of you. Tia, I got to know your work before I even came to Minneapolis when I was in New Orleans, and the ways in which you're thinking about trying to really reimagine Black geographies of the American South, but also create this entire critical imaginary around Blackness in your work is so inspiring and exciting, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. Sieng, I feel like your deep commitment to the Hmong community here and beyond the city, as well as the ways you're pushing limits of sculpture, is really remarkable. And Lindsay, every time I come and see your work, I'm so inspired about the way that you look at the world around you, at the textiles that get discarded and found, and the ways that you imagine these brand new compositions. So I'm excited to talk to you about how you think about your work. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions that are for everybody, and then a couple of questions that are for each of you individually, and then we'll open things up to the audience. And I think I'll start with a question for all three of you. One of the things that I feel unites all three of your practices is a really inventive and unexpected use of materials, and a way in which you're all working in really inventive ways that kind of cross disciplinary boundaries. Whether Tia, that's related to your bookmaking, exhibition making, and kind of cartography work. Lindsay, the ways you're pushing the limits of textiles. Sieng, the kind of ways in which you're really pushing the possibilities of what it means to be Hmong and thinking about new ways of reimagining or even departing from historical precedent. So I'm curious if all of you can share with us a little bit about the materials you use, how you were drawn to them, and how they impact the way that you think about and make your work. Maybe, I don't know, Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind starting.
So I usually work with mostly recycled and secondhand materials, and a lot of my work is inspired directly by things I find on a certain day or things I dig out of my archive of fabric and stuff. And yeah, basically I just like, sometimes I make it up as I go along, and other times I have an idea of what I'm doing before, and sometimes it's just directly inspired by the fabric or the beads or whatever I have on hand.
How long do one of these take you to make?
Somewhere between like 1 month and like many months. It just really depends on how often I'm sewing and like the amount of space I have to work with and things like that. Yeah.
It's hard to get a sense from the images, but some of this work is enormous. I mean, they're really unbelievable, the way that you've constructed them. So thank you. Tia, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about materials in your practice and how you think about them.
I just want to echo the thank yous to Keisha and Melanie for supporting us this year, the last 2 years. And thank you, Katie, so much for being here. Materials. I work with images, and I like that, but I also, am like a lowercase p photographer. And so I am more interested in what images like can and can't do than like making an image. And so that has freed me up to work with a lot of different kinds of materials. I've been recently interested in cyanotypes because the cyanotype material comes from iron salts, and I'm doing this work that's about the steel industry, and iron is one, rare earth mineral that composes steel, and so it felt like a way to connect not just the images, but like the way the images are built, and so I'm interested in those kinds of connections that like are both like I think like interesting to look at, but also like have some sort of like long historical time and attachment, which I think is like also connected to like Lindsay, like the way you're thinking about like what's found and what's there and building from there.
Yeah, the material is really important to the work that I do. I do it very intentionally I do it very intentionally. I would say that I'm not even in the image that you see up here when I was installing here at the MIA. I would say if a furniture maker saw the way that I went about making my stuff, they would be appalled and disgusted in how I put my benches together. But that's beyond the point, as I've always said, because the way I treat material, especially especially in the work that I previously have done, is how it's based off of religious and cultural identity. So then, and there's a sacredness that's attached to materials, right? I mean, that's really important. And when you really use something out, when you really take it outside of what the construct of what being sacred is, then it changes the fact, right? And the way that you speak about it really changes the way that art is, because then it's devoid almost of that religious connotations, of the cultural connotations, and then it puts it back into just a materials mode. And it's so that you're not really adding more value. I think it's important to have value, but you're not adding more religious value or cultural value to the objects in itself. And that material itself, speaks for it. And it doesn't have to really, as I always say, it's just paper or it's just wood, and that what I bring in myself is that addition to what the work is. So like how important that material to the work is always absolutely very important in what I do and still continue to think about doing.
I wonder if each of you could lead us through one project of yours, whether it's an individual work or a body of work, something that you're working on or have worked on, and just talk a little bit about some of the ways in which you went about it and some of the ideas behind it, just to kind of like help ground and orient this group in each of your practices. I don't know if, Lindsay, you could talk a little bit perhaps about the work that is kind of cycling here.
So this piece is like my newest piece, and I've been working on it for about a year, on and off. Like, that's pretty crazy long time, but it's an image of a gas station that's near my house on Bloomington and 25th. That's been abandoned for many, many years, and it's also been a homeless camp, and it has fences around it, and just, it's become many different things over the years, and they just keep trying to keep people out of there and stuff. And yeah, I just took a picture of this place on a really dreary day where there was snow and garbage everywhere, but there was a beautiful sunset, and I think even though things are dreary and snowy, like just seeing the sunset that's beautiful is just a really nice thing to see in contrast with something that's kind of like sad.
Sure. So the work that's here is coming from a project that I feel like I've been working on forever, but it's probably more like the last 4 years. What I've been interested in and thinking about materials, some part of my work is the material is research. And so I've been researching the town I'm from, which is Fairfield. It was a model city for U.S. Steel, and it was modeled after Gary, Indiana. And Gary was a failed project in this sort of like capitalist progressivism. And so they were like, let's try that again, Fairfield, Alabama, adjacent to Birmingham, because Birmingham was already hyper-developed, and it was like, here's an opportunity. The thing was, like, they designed this town thinking about things like civic space, making room for like workers to have leisure, so they had a park. But it was supposed to be like a white-collar, sleepy town, which at that time in 1909 meant it was white-collar and all white. And so like the work that I've been interested in is like how my family got there. In the 50s, there's like layers of this, and I won't go through all of it, but they create a subdivision that is for Black people because it's still segregated. And because interracial intimacy and land use could not coexist, they put a berm, like this natural tree line around it. So it appears natural, but it's actually man-made. And the result of that is like a series of dead-end streets. So like if you're not from there, it looks like the C- planning students laid out the town. But actually, it's on purpose. And so trying to figure out a form that all of this can live in has been, you know, my journey for the last long time. And like some of this is like interviews with my elders, and some of it is me making photographs, but you know, then like where does that live? So I started working with the cyanotypes. I got this huge bundle of deaccessioned geology manuals and reports from that range from like 1897 to 1974-ish. And so I've been re-authoring those books, both with images that I make and with things that I'm writing about. And I'm also like developing, I have been thinking about the dead end, and I'm so sorry my answer is so long. I will wrap it up. But like the dead end, like what does that, you know, like what I've written about is that like in a place that's so full of Black life, what does it mean to have this place marked in I think I counted 12 of these. There are actually 18, but like there's 12 in our proper part of the city, like as dead and ended. And so I've been thinking about like antonyms for those, and like placing those as replacement signs for those dead end streets, as sort of poetic interventions. And so that is what I've been doing and thinking about that's what this work is. Yeah.
So when I got my McKnight, it came at a 10-year marker for when I first started doing sculpture-based installation, doing work about my particular identity within the Hmong American community. And I thought, wow, I've made it. Like, I've got the McKnight now, what do I do? And that's sort of a marker in which I track how things have come along. And at that moment too, what was kind of funny, once I got the McKnight, I know we introduced myself as that I'm still an artist in residence at the Dwight Bear Center for Arts, but I'm no longer there. But that's it. Once I got the McKnight, I was no longer an artist in residence, and there's sort of a shift in the work that I've done. But I think about regardless of that, I think about when I first started making work as an artist and really going at why I started doing this. And I think about the first time I said I'm going to do sculpture installation work. I was in my studio. I burned some incense, and I was fearful, right? I prayed to my ancestors. I said, please don't come and haunt me because of the work that I'm about to do or what I'm about to do to my community, right? And it's a fearfulness that allowed for me to propel myself from that work into the McKnight, right? I mean, these are trajectories in which we take as individuals and as artists. And now with that like that body of work and that aesthetics that has been built over for the last 10 years, it's really at that point of what am I afraid of right now, right? I think about that moment in that transition period of the fearfulness in which I ask for forgiveness from my own ancestors who don't even exist, at least physically. But now what's my fear? What's my fear and anxiety that hopefully can help take that? Because that's always been a strong emotional marker in which I've gauged to be able to say, this is the direction and this is the concept in which I want to take, right? Because you know, in making work at first about my community, I've learned a lot about how that means, and the work itself has always been an accumulation of 10 years worth of work. And like I said, being new to the artist stuff, I said, once I get the McKnight, I've made it. And you know, I got it, and now it's sort of got to figure out what's next, right?
So this next question is for Lindsay, but anybody is welcome to answer it if they'd like to. You know, every time I look at your work, Lindsay, I think so much about memory. both the kind of memories carried by the materials you use, that these were things that were worn and owned by people before you found them or they came into the kind of universe of your work, but also the kind of memory, and I think in some cases like longing, nostalgia, feeling that's evoked by the scenes that you create. These this scene of this gas station, some of the interior scenes you create. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you think about memory and the construction of these really incredible scenes that you're making through textile collage.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is about the materials that they have been used before. And also I use some materials that might be recognizable to people because they're like retro and maybe mass produced, mass designed. And I like to put stuff like that in my work that people, their brains will like be like, I've seen this before. This is from a pillowcase I had when I was a kid or something like that. Or like, that's like the beads from a bracelet I used to have, stuff like that.
Anyone else like to answer that? You good? Okay. Well, Tia, my question to you, which I know we talked about a bit yesterday, is around urgency, and how that kind of manifests and shows up in your work. I think, one of the first things we talked about is this feeling that I think we're all feeling like the world is ending. On the other hand, we might also say that the world has been ending for a very long time. And I'm wondering, how you think about the kind of pressure of the urgency of this moment, the responsibility of urgency, and how that manifests in your work. Like, what are you urgent for and to? And also maybe how can you resist that feeling in some ways?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I think as somebody who values slowness, I just said I've been working on something for 4 years. I have always been fine with that part of my practice, that like just, waiting for something to make itself known. And, like there's a part of this work that, like my elder, it's like weird, right? Like my mother's generation, they're now like they're my age. Well, hold on, let me fix that. My mother's generation, I realized, were my age when their elders started to pass, or people that I understood as elders. I never talked about or thought about my mother's generation as elders, but now they are, and they are passing, and a thing that's taken me so long, I want them to have a chance to see it. Like I want this work that is so much about them and how they trained me to see place, and they taught me about power before I ever heard of Michel Foucault, that like I want them to see this work in their lifetime. And so I feel like I gotta finish. Now it's not necessarily a thing I want, which is to like move faster, but it is something that I think is like situationally required right now, and so I have to I have to finish. Yeah.
And saying, I think something that I have really loved talking with you about over the course of the last year, couple of years, is how you're trying to construct the relationship between your art making practice and your activism, and where the art begins and ends, where the activism exists. What does it mean to merge the two things? And I really want to emphasize that at the same time that you have this very dynamic sculpture installation based practice, you're also actively working in community organizing. And I know that kind of the relationship between those things has been something that's very much on your mind, and I think on a lot of our minds. What is art's role in activism? How do we think about activism as art? And how do we relate those two? So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the ways that's manifested in your work, and how you might think into that in the future as well.
Yeah, I think activism is such a tricky word for artists in particular. I think there's a degree in how we do activism, right? I think when I first started really getting into my community and started doing work, I also got very political at that time too. I got very political because as you understand more about your community and you understand the difficulties in which you face, it's not just you can't present a solution via just the aesthetics in which you create to represent on behalf of your community. This also means that you have to be motivated in social, political, and economic issues directly on the ground. And when I talk about political, we're talking about community organizing at a grassroots and very guerrilla style, doing stuff where it's not just a talking head or talking machine about these kind of things. You're directly in community trying to impact as much as you can. And I think that part of my community activism and political work hasn't really reflected the work in which I've done in the last 10 years. I don't know if this is the right time to be doing it, but it feels like it might be the right time. And it's something that I've struggled with, and I think a lot of artists of color struggle with this, is really, do we pit ourselves in this activist lens, and then also in this justice lens, and does that make us less than or more than artists? And I think that's the struggle. And in particular, I speak on behalf of just my community, but I know our communities of color and our allies know that this is something that we fight for, and we make work like this, but we're also very cognizant of what's going on out there and around these spaces that we're not here. So I think that's why I think it's important to have those discussions. How that is reflected in the work is still up for debate, right? And for especially young artists and young artists of color. And I say that only because of the experience in which I have in it. And we have this discussion. And when is the right time to weave some of that into the work without having to force yourself into a scenario that really isn't, I think, authentic or genuine at the same time.
Something else that really came up in all the conversations I've had with each of you is, art's role in community. Several of you are making work about or for specific communities. And I think, this question of what community means in the context of an art practice, we always talk about it, we very rarely define it. I think we also very rarely think about the ways that it might shift over time. And I'm curious, to hear a little bit from each of you about the role of community or communities in your work, and perhaps another way of saying this is like, who do you feel that you're making your art for?
Yeah, I think when we talk about community, it's really important to emphasize that even myself, I don't represent the whole of my community in any way, right? I mean, when I say community, it's just trying to find belonging and place within that larger whole of us being within a community, because we're in multiple communities and multiple spaces that not everybody can be a part of. But it's really important to I think what art does a really good job is identifying where you are within that, and what do you bring into the table of that community, that aspect within your community, even if it's not representative of exactly the whole, right? I think it's it's linking at a broad range and really approaching it from that perspective, because I've always said this, there's tons of artists within my community who are doing work and producing much more than what I'm producing, or is more engaged at a community level more than I'm engaging. But that's not the point of being a community. I think it's just looking for and identifying and defining are the importance of what artists really do, right? And then how we fulfill that part of what it is, because I think it's sometimes we carry that burden of representation, and that representation of a whole community or a segment of community is something that nobody should ever be carrying that burden.
Well, and I think it might also be possible just to say that you're making work for yourself. That's anyway. Lindsay, if you want to answer.
I don't feel like I'm making art for any particular community, but I feel like I want to inspire people to be like, hey, you don't have to go to school and get a degree to make art, and you can just if you feel inspired to just be a really creative person, just go out and do it. Or like DIY stuff, have your own art shows. You don't have to like wait around for someone to acknowledge you, you know what I mean? And if you feel like doing it, just go for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that in relationship to what I do or what I make, I think community and audience are not the same thing. And I think some of the labor is to like bring those two things closer, but I'm also okay when they're just not aligned. I think there is, you know, like I teach and that is a practice, and like I make work and that is a practice. Does my family fully understand what I do every day? No. So like I think like the book as a form, you know, that is something they do understand. They understand when your name is on a like this printed material. Going to my shows, it's like cool. And like, you know, it's not something they can pass around to a friend, you know. And so I think, you know, I am understanding better now, like where audience and community are different and where they are the same. Yeah.
Now, before we open it up to questions from the audience, I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit about something that you are thinking about or working on that you're excited about, that's coming, that's next. That might be a show or a project or an idea. It might be just like resting. We want to hear about that too. So if all of you could just share a little bit about things you have on the horizon that you're excited about.
Yeah, the biggest important thing for me is rest is really important to the work, but what I'm really interested in doing is to devoid myself of identity in the work. There's been really, so even in the aesthetics in which I've created has been really strong as attached to who I am in the physical identity. But then, you know, what does that look like when that part of me doesn't exist? And, you know, how long that work, you know, in a 10-year trajectory goes for is in what that body of work or what those kind of ideas or concepts really look like as I move forward as an artist.
Well, I'm looking forward to starting a new project and starting a new studio space hopefully soon. And I think I'm probably going to have an art show at Hair and Nails Gallery in 2026. So that's something you can go see next year.
I have been thinking about rest, but essentially like I'm interested in like how something like technology can enable us to rest. Like what is like a Black feminist ethical approach to some of these like technologies we're seeing now that actually might stave off some kinds of harm that we experience. So that's the next thing that I'm excited to work on, and it feels like a good time to do that. It feels in like talking to people about like, hey, what about this? Like, is this something that like I see people like interested and curious about it, which means like everybody is exhausted and needs something. And while we can turn to each other, there's also, you know, this huge plethora of like digital worlding that I think we can do. So I'm interested. I think that's what's coming next for me.
Please figure that out for all of us.
Working on it. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for such amazing answers and for this great dialogue. I think we'll open it up to the audience for questions if folks want to ask individual questions to one of the artists or general questions to the whole group.
Hello. Thank you so much for the talk today. It was really interesting hearing from all of you, and I know that as someone who does art on the side, I often get inspiration from other artworks, right? Other artists, maybe movies or sculptures or paintings. So I was just wondering, what are some of your favorite artworks, whether that be in a visual medium or maybe a book or something like that? So yeah.
Good question.
I'll go so something that I love, and if my art education had been different, or if maybe I just had like the hubris, the ego, like I love like the earthworks, like I like Michael Heiser, Nancy Holt, like, and like, who are you to use the landscape like that? But like I love that, and like I think about those things all the time, cause like why? But why not? Yeah.
I'm here forever. You're gonna do that. So you know what? I'm just saying it.
Well, I'd say like my favorite art area is actually music, and what I like to do is like listen to music and ride around in my bike and just observe the world around me, and I feel like that's one of the biggest inspirations for my artwork and just in life in general, just listening to music and just like observing stuff and sometimes taking pictures of it, you know.
What are you listening to right now?
Nothing.
Yeah, so I'm always really bad with names, especially with art history. You know, if you are an art history person in here, you know, that's always something that I struggle with, and then really trying to find where my work is. But I always remember when I first started looking and understanding art, especially you know, modern and contemporary art, I look towards really the Dadaists, and especially Marcel Duchamp. Or even those initial ideas when I first began to think about sculpture installation work, right? I think there's a lot, it's very heavy in these traditional Western ideas of what art making is, but I also believe that has to inform the work and sort of provides historical context and how we think about it. So that's generally kind of the stuff, because because a lot of my work is there's some uncanniness, and there's also humor interject directly into that, so that it's not just, you know, very serious, very modern, very kind of museum like.
My question has two parts, and the first part is that it's easy to look back to see the thread that ties our previous projects together. So my first question is, what is that thread that ties your projects together? And then the second part is, with the influence of the McKnight Fellowship and the workshops and your meetings, how is that going to shape your next project?
Okay. So as far as like a thing that all my projects have in common, it's basically just sewing, like a basic whip stitch, and I use that in all the different types of work I do, and so it's in every single project, even if I'm working on like costumes or clothes. So that's the thing that is in common with everything. And as far as the future, I don't really know, actually. I'm just taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, I think when I think geography, but like the reason that is that like coming from the South, probably everybody in this room has some images of the South that they hold in their mind. That is not the South that I know because I grew up in the 80s. And that is what that is now, like what Birmingham is now is like radically different from the ways it has been pictured. So geography actually helped me to re-see the place I'm from. Like I could see relationships, which is what that geography is. It's like relationships between people, between material, between objects, in time, like, and so I think that is the thing that stitches all my work. But you know, there's like multiple things, and like the future, you know, I think this enabled me to like have a break. Like with money comes a little bit of stress relief, and so I had like some break. But you know, of course, occupied that with doing other things, and I think I would like another break.
Yeah, to me in particular, I think belonging is always something that kind of threads into the work that that I've done in the last couple of years here. I think that's something that's really important in trying to find place. Like I said, maybe that's just the nature in which my community or myself has been brought in as a refugee coming to this country, but it's always continuously been something that has been instilled. And I also believe that it's also important to have that sense of accomplishment and acknowledgement too. I think that's what's important about the McKnight Fellowship and even any sort of grant or fellowship that we get as artists in Minnesota. We were so thankful. Right? I mean, part of my work that I do is I talk to communities throughout the United States about different things, and Minnesota's in a really prime spot. And I think what McKnight does really well is allow a person, as Tia said, it's just sometimes to breathe, because you know, it's been a constant whirlwind of making and thinking. And with this, like, you gotta have that pause, and hopefully something comes out of that calmness in which we have been working towards. So like I think that's important, because I don't think any of us up here or any artist really knows exactly what's going to come out of their work, because those are just things that you have to work towards. But that's the way I see moving forward.
An artist says, I'm going to make the most original artwork that is ever there. And the archivist says, let's make sure that this time the people remember it. So as you are using archive to make your work, I wonder if you are considering about archiving your own work, both for personal reasons, but also for posterity.
Kamel's a McKnight Fellow. He's a plant. What a great question.
Great question.
Great question. And no. I should be. But like, I've lost so much stuff. And like at this point, I want to archive I need to. How do you archive your mind? You know, like, you lose things just as quickly as you find them. I do right now. And like, there's this like Kanye West, I know we're through with him, but like there's this Kanye West line, like, I've forgotten better shit than you ever thought of. And like, I think that is a thing that actively happens all the time. And it's not that like my ego, but I think like, right, like, oh right, I was thinking about that like a few months ago. And so I'm not, and I should.
Yeah, I don't do much archiving, so I don't know. I mean, most of my, at least some of the initial work that I've done has always been paper, and I've burnt them all. So even that work doesn't necessarily even exist. For for its own reasons too, and I think it's important. But I haven't really thought about archiving.
This would be a great stream of grant making, I'm just saying.
I've been taking pictures of my work to archive it, I suppose, and I guess a form of archiving is having a lot of my work just like hanging out at my friends' houses on their walls, and I write down where I put it, and then I can go get it later, you know? I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our artists and our moderator. As always, this is such a bittersweet moment because it means that the time in the fellowship has come to an end, but it's always the best way to end it because we get to hear from our artists. And so I hope you're walking away inspired. I hope you have an opportunity, if not tonight, to connect with these artists because they're doing such important work in our communities. And that's what we need now more than ever. So we're going to conclude our discussion for tonight. Please make your way into the atrium and we can have a little bit more conversation with our artists, but thank you so much.